45 years ago, Ayatollah Khamenei announced that he intended to destroy Israel, the little Satan, the center of corruption and arrogance in the Middle East. And if you look around at the recent mass missile attack on Israel, unprecedented in modern times, it looks like his successor, Ali Khamenei, is attempting to keep that promise. Welcome back to another episode of Israel Under Fire. I'm Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, and today we're talking about Iran at war with Israel. In fact, since 1979, 45 years ago, Ayatollah Khamenei announced that he intended to destroy Israel, the little Satan, the center of corruption and arrogance in the Middle East. And if you look around at the recent mass missile attack on Israel, unprecedented in modern times, it looks like his successor, Ali Khamenei, is attempting to keep that promise of the destruction of the Jews. But then again, are we surprised? In order to help us understand the Iranian regime's malign intentions, we have a special guest, Dr. Harold Rhode, author of Modern Islamic Warfare, an Ancient Doctrine Marches On. Is exactly what the doctor ordered. Harold Rhode, welcome to the program.
Nice to be here, Dan. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for giving us a lot of insight over the years. You are one of the real, as they say in Hebrew, Talmidei Muvhakim, the real proteges of the great, I would call him the grand Ayatollah of freedom, liberty, democracy, and an understanding of all things Near Eastern Islam. I'm talking about Professor Bernard Lewis, who taught us much about the Near East and the Islamic world. What should we know about an Iranian regime that in 2024 continues to march on in its version of messianic Islamic warfare against Israel and the West, I might say?
The Iranians, and for that matter, even the Palestinians, they don't lie to us. If we listen in their languages, let's talk about Iran, in Persian, the major language of Iran, it's very clear. If you read their constitution, which expresses deeply, their goal is to destroy the Jewish state. The Jewish state is founded, as far as the Muslims are concerned, on Muslim territory. And once territory is Muslim, it's Muslim forever. They tell us this. We don't want to listen, and we do that at our peril.
Why is the West deaf, if you will, self-imposed deafness to the truth of Iranian regime intentions? This has been going on for decades, Harold Rhode. We remember the Iranians not only declaring month in and month out, whether it's Al-Quds Day, meaning Jerusalem Day, where they march all of their ballistic missiles and other ammunition, weaponry, hundreds of thousands of their forces, whether it's the regular forces, whether it's the IRGC forces, whether it's what they call the popular mobilization forces, which they call the Besiege. I mean, they're really only living not only to oppress their own people, but to destroy enemies beyond the oceans, and beginning with the one of the smallest nations on earth, the state of Israel.
Two answers. Number one, the original enemy of Muhammad, their prophet, the original were the Jews. And they've got a beef to us, as the great Tzvi Yechezkeli tells us over and over again. They must defeat us. It's essential for Islam to do this, because there are two battles in early Islam, one in Mecca, where their prophet was trying to get the Jews to follow him, to become what later was called Muslims. They didn't use that word in the beginning. And there were three Jewish tribes, and they refused to follow him. So Muhammad had his followers slaughter the Jews. This is all in the biography of their prophet. It's the Sirah. It's all listed there, how they did it, and they're very proud of this. And while they slaughtered him, that is the head of the major tribes, let's say that Muhammad was having relations with his with his wife, who they say she happily, after her husband was slaughtered, converted to Islam. So it starts in the very beginning. And then there's another battle that Muhammad had in a place called Khaybar. There is a phrase that everybody knows here in the Middle East, Khaybar, Khaybar, ya Yehud, Jesh Muhammad Sayaud, because the army of Muhammad is going to return. They have patience, they know how to wait, and they eventually will destroy us. Now, from my experience, I went to university in Iran in a place called Mashhad during the early and mid stages of the Iranian Revolution. The Shah was still there. People like myself, we lived an Iranian life. All our classes were in Persian. Everywhere we went was Persian. And here's a little story which tells how they are and why it is so important for us to act today in a particular way.
We're ending this first segment introducing the philosophy, the history, the psychology of the Iranian regime, and basically putting it in a bottle, which is called Harold Rhode's personal biography and experience in Iran during the revolution, which we're going to talk about in this next segment. So we want our audience to stay with us. And when we come back, it's going to be Rhode in Mashhad. Welcome back to Israel Under Fire. I'm Dan Diker, President of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. I'm here with Dr. Harold Rhode, one of the world's leading experts on Iranian political culture. And the Iranian regime, served many years at the United States Department of Defense as an expert on Iran and a personal witness to political change in Iran. Harold, you were physically a student in Iran during the 1979 Islamic Revolution. What sticks with you today as Iran, for the first time, publicly, directly, openly assaulted Israel with hundreds of surface-to-surface missiles, killer drones, and other projectiles?
Israel is, number one, the Jewish state, which is on Muslim territory, as far as they're concerned. Israel is a pawn. Shiites don't care about Jerusalem. They don't care about all this. What they do care about, first and foremost, is the battle of which type of Islam is correct. They're almost separate religions, Shiite and Sunni. And the Shiites today are represented by Iran, that's the greatest power, and the Sunnis are represented by Saudi Arabia. And if the Arabs tried since 1948 and actually before to destroy the Jewish entity and then the Jewish state here, and they failed, the Arab Sunnis. And so the Shiites are saying, well, we'll show you how to do it. We will destroy Israel, and then everybody will see what the true form of religion is, and that is it. It's Shiism. This may be, and Israel's a pawn here. We may not want to see it, but that's how they're seeing it. So if they can succeed in destroying it, then they will make the Sunnis, Saudi Arabia will be shamed, and then they're going to, then maybe at the same time they'll go after Saudi Arabia. This is all like, who cares? This is religion. The West doesn't care about religion anymore.
The Middle East lives religious and ideological warfare. The West is in a post-ideological religious warfare era. And this really accounts for why so many in the West look at Israel from their own more secular political standpoint as being some sort of great power where they see us opposite their view of the small Palestinians struggling for, as the narrative goes, their freedom, when in fact the war is something completely different, as you're pointing out. This is a religious, ideological, Iranian regime war by Messianic Shiites, as well as by Sunni Muslims who, in Hamas's case, and in the case of the Palestinian Authority, they're very similar ideologically, they're just different, perhaps, in the way they carry out their opposition to the existence of a Jewish national sovereignty in the Middle East. But these are religious actors who are looking to wipe out the Jews because of religious antipathy and religion. It's all religiously driven.
We in the West, first of all, we belittle religion. And for them, it's everything. And so when they make arguments, religious arguments about why their God wants us destroyed, the Jews, we look up, come on, that couldn't be serious. Well, it is. Now, if you want to really understand how the Iranians see this, some of the best people who deal with America speak perfect American English. And we here in the West believe that once you speak the holy language, which is English, and the better you speak it, that means you think American or you think Western. And they use this to our advantage. How do we know this? During the JCPOA, the 2015 negotiations, surrender by the United States to Iran, because that's what it was. The more America gave in to Iranian demands, the more the Iranians increased their demands. And that's what they have done with America since President Biden has been in office. The same thing. And they're basically the same people who are giving in. Now, how do I know this, or how do we know this? Zarif, who was the Iranian foreign minister, who spoke in excellent English and knew our culture very well. He was very close friends, supposedly, with a guy named John Kerry, who was the American Secretary of State at the time. Zarif wrote a book in Persian, in which, of course, nobody reads, in which he describes how he basically wheeled in Kerry and made Kerry think that Zarif was a friend, because he spoke such good English and he understood American culture. Now, John Kerry had, at one time during these negotiations, broke his leg, and he was on crutches. The more America, and in the Middle East, cartoons are the way that they express how they feel. And what happened in these cartoons? The more Kerry gave in, the more the crutches became bigger in the cartoons. It's on the net. You can see these things. And then another one. Black skin, dark skin in Iran is a negative.
There's a racism, deep racism in the Iranian Weltanschauung, in their worldview.
Yes, because here's why. When the Arabs came out of Arabia and took and captured Iran, Iran had been an empire for 1,100 years by then. The whole story of the Book of Esther took place in those 1,100 years. And here is this civilized civilization. The Iranian civilization is fascinating. It's 2,600 years old, approximately. And this was the defeat of a bunch of nomads that the Iranians looked down upon by the sophisticated Iranian culture. Iranians call Arabs lizard eaters, desert rats. The Arabs don't like the Persians either. The Iranians see Arabs as paper towels, like you get them killed, like they support Hamas. But if Hamas guys die, you just get a new Arab to do your dirty work for you. The same is true with the Houthis, who are Shiites, just like Iran, of a different type of Shiism, but they're not Sunnis. And as far as the Iranians are concerned, and the same as with Hezbollah, even though they're Arabs, they're Shiites in Lebanon and in Syria. If they die, you just get a new Arab. They hate and despise Arabs. That is also, so there's not only a religious Shiite versus Sunni, there's Iranian civilization versus Arab from an Iranian point of view, barbarity.
So it looks like the Iranian regime is essentially revisiting history at this current moment. And the question is, what does the West do opposite this terror-ridden empire called the IRGC, the Ayatollahs, the mullahs, the empire of Iran? Stay with us. We'll be right back on Israel Under Fire to discuss what can be done with Harold Rhode. Welcome back to Israel Under Fire. I'm Dan Diker. I'm here with Dr. Harold Rhode, one of the world's leading authorities on the politics, psychology of Islam and Iran. And here we are, Harold Rhode. What can Israel and the West do, or should I say, what should Israel and the West do in order to overcome and even uproot what really is this evil empire called the Iranian regime?
From my experience, and I could describe galore what I saw at university during the early and mid stages of the Iranian Revolution, which were 1978. I fled in late 78. I fled to Afghanistan because the place was going crazy. It was chaos. Two things. Number one, the Iranians always have their finger in the air, and they want to know where the wind is blowing. There's no such thing as public opinion. The answer is who has power? And they were very good at shifting from being, shall we say, apparently pro-Shah, because if you weren't, you got in trouble, to pro-Khomeini. And they didn't even know who Khomeini was. How do I know that? I had a weird thing happen to me. I was 28 at the time during all these riots. And they would go out and all these students in Shiism, you're supposed to have a grand Ayatollah that you follow. So I'm asking in this holy city where I went to university, and what was your grand Ayatollah? Who was yours? Your family's. And they would all look at me with a beautiful, Iranians are very good looking people. They look with beautiful smiles and all, and as if they didn't understand what I was talking about. That's like asking a Jew who was Abraham and who was Moses and saying, I've never heard of him. It's not possible. I knew the names of 6 grand Ayatollahs. The Shah was still in power. And I mentioned them to people. And one of them I mentioned was the Ayatollah Khomeini, the grand Ayatollah Khomeini. I didn't know much about him. And they all looked at me in their beautiful, sweet faces and smiled as if they didn't know what I was talking about. All of a sudden, the university was falling apart, and people were out in the street yelling, Marg bar Shah, death to the Shah, Durog or Javid. Greetings to or long live Khomeini. I was mad watching that because I had mentioned Khomeini. I'm totally wrong, but didn't know it. I come back to the dorms. Then all of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. Harold, and this is all Persian, in Persian. Harold, can we speak with you? And I'm furious, but I'm holding it in. They said, Khomeini kieh. If you know French, it's backwards. Kieh Khomeini. It's in Persian, it's backwards. Who is Khomeini? And then I said, Harold, I don't understand what's going on. What happened here is they had seen power shifting. Khomeini was by then in Paris. And every time that he was being asked questions, he would start, how are you? Bad as Raftan Shah. As soon as the Shah goes, X, Y, and Z. And they saw power shifting. The Shah wasn't stopping this. He had no way to do it or whatever. And they knew, and they shifted with power. Why is this important? The Iranian people, by and large today, hate their regime. But if they say it, they're going to get in trouble. So what happens, and I'll tell you how we know this. It's not public opinion surveys. No one dare would say what they really think. We see when the government looks weak. And you'll see what I'm talking about with what Israel did, by responding to Iran's attack on Israel. The Iranians saw this as weakness. And we have pictures galore from inside Iran where people are writing graffiti on the walls saying, Israel, strike them, strike the regime. When we see that they are weak and can't do anything, we will come out in the streets and we will call for their deaths. Now, one other thing which is extremely important, everywhere in the Middle East, the concept of patience is extremely important. We know how to wait. They have been waiting since 631, since their prophet died, on trying to figure out to one side best the other, meaning whether Shiism or Sunnis are right. The Shiites are the family of the prophet, their prophet, and the Sunnis are the Meccan aristocracy. They're fighting over to this day. Who wins? You can't have bygones be bygones. Now, they are waiting, the Iranian people, whether it's them or the Palestinians or whatever, everybody in this case is the same. They know how to wait. You can't fight power because you'll get killed. And so, oh, you're sweet and you're nice. And it's why, vis-a-vis whether it is Hamas on Israel's border or the Palestinian Authority, they totally agree on the destruction of the Jewish state. But their methods are slightly different. How then to handle this? What you do is I wouldn't even worry about the nuclear program. We don't care. Nuclear weapons don't kill people. It's people that kill people. And for example, are we worried that the United States, Britain, or France, or even India have nuclear weapons? No. When a regime and a government has to answer to its people, you don't do these things. We're not worried. The outside was not worried about Israel having nuclear weapons. But when you have a dictator, you are worried. My response is get rid of the dictators in Iran. And there are a lot of internal fissures that they can use, that we can use with a little bit of, thinking, smart thinking, which America is not good at. America and Israel are very good at understanding, getting information. But I'm not so sure they're good at understanding what the information means. The greatest Iranian expert in Israel is a guy named Eliyahu Yossian, who until the age of 23 lived in Isfahan in central Iran, then made Aliyah, Jewish. He's been in Israel for 20 years since then. He's 43. And he understands the mentality beautifully. And that I wish that people would listen to him more and not to try to ostracize him, because he's got it. He was in Unit 8200 for a period of time, and he won the Israel Security Prize. I have no idea in what. It's not my business to know. But there are a lot of people, since he calls that the regime has to be finished. You got to attack the regime. And what do you do here? You attack its financial sources, which means the infrastructure, oil and gas, whatever it is, that can be rebuilt, and it's not too difficult to do so, from what I understand. I'm not an expert in those things. Listen to what Yossian says, because he's got it right.
Thank you, Harold Rhode. The bottom line that you are underscoring is attack the regime and trigger regime change. That's your prescription for today, if I'm getting it.
And get the people out in the streets. And from what we know, the moment that the Iranian people see the weakness of the regime, that it doesn't have the ability to keep itself in power, or the will, whatever it is, but we can attack that. As we can, once they're up in the streets, and all of a sudden, death to the regime. We're not talking death to Shiism. These people are devoutly religious people. But the traditional Shiites leadership believes it belongs in the seminaries and not ruling. And that's what the people believe.
Here we are, exclamation point on that's what the people believe. We'll leave it there and thank our dear friend, Dr. Harold Rhode, international expert on all things Iranian, particularly political culture. And that is what is really missing today in the international discussion, is how do we handle and confront that political culture of the regime when 90% of the Iranian people are with the West. We'll have to keep it at that for now. A pause and much to think about. Harold Rhode, thanks so much for joining us on Israel Under Fire, and thank you to our viewing audience.